This is Lester. He's a sculptor, and he loves his dogs. He's going to make a bronze sculpture of his dog Zazu. The first step in creating a bronze sculpture is to build a model out of clay. Why do we start with clay if what we want is bronze? Well, bronze in its solid state is too hard to carve. So first we need to make a model, and clay is a great material because it's so malleable. But clay is kind of heavy, so an artist will use an armature, often out of wire, to support the clay. This clay model serves as the template for the final bronze sculpture. The purpose of a clay model is to create a cavity, which later hot wax can be poured into to create a replica. I know it might sound confusing, clay to wax to bronze? The bronze process requires creating many different iterations until we have a form strong enough to withhold the molten bronze. But don't worry, you'll see it all. So the artist uses a clay model to build a mold or outer shell, usually out of plaster. Plaster is lime with sand or cement mixed with water. It's a perfect material for the mold because it can be applied easily as a liquid and then hardens to a solid. As the plaster is applied directly onto the clay, it takes on every detail of the model. These aluminum walls create sections of plaster. Once the dividers are removed, notches or grooves are carved into the plaster to later help the pieces fit together. It's like making a puzzle. Now that the plaster is completely dry, the artist carefully takes apart the cast or mold by sections. This is done with various tools and a lot of patience. Once all of the plaster is removed, the clay model and armature are discarded. The artist reassembles the plaster pieces, leaving a hollow cavity with every detail of the clay model imprinted on the inside of the plaster mold. Now we're ready for the wax. Wax is solid when it's cool, but when it's heated, it turns to liquid. So the artist heats the wax on the stove and the wax bricks begin to melt. Meanwhile, the artist soaks the plaster mold in water. You know how oil and water don't mix? Well, if the plaster is wet, then the oil-based wax can coat the inside of the plaster, but not get too stuck. Once the wax is melted completely, the artist pours it into the plaster mold, tilting and turning the plaster to make sure every inch gets coated. The wax cools and hardens instantly. Now the artist needs to separate the plaster from the wax. Putting the mold back into the water helps to remove each plaster section, revealing the wax copy. Wow, look at that! It looks just like the original clay model. The plaster pieces can even be put back together to make additional wax copies. Next, the artist cleans up the wax copy. This is the last chance to fix imperfections before the bronze is cast. The artist uses small tools to remove every tiny bit of plaster from the wax copy and smooths and sculpts the wax for the last time. Then the artist attaches a wax cup and wax branches called sprues. These provide paths for the molten bronze to enter the form and for air to escape. If the air can't escape, the piece might explode. So the artist then dips the wax copy in a slurry, which is a mix of fine particles of silica. Next, the wet piece gets coated with stucco. The gritty slurry is called a ceramic shell, even though it's not literally made of ceramic. The shell then is allowed to dry, and the artist repeats the process lots of times until he gets just the right thickness. The purpose of the ceramic shell is that it is extremely heat resistant. Finally, we have a material that can withstand the temperature of molten bronze. So now the ceramic shell is placed in a big kiln or oven. This one is specifically used for burning out the wax. The heat hardens the silica coatings and the wax melts and runs out. Again, water helps in the process, this time to consolidate the wax so it can be used again. Now all that remains of the original artwork is the negative space formerly occupied by the wax. Yet it still retains all of the original detail. The ceramic shell is placed cup upwards into a tub filled with sand. So finally, we're ready for the bronze. The bronze is melted in a furnace until it reaches over 2,000 degrees. The bronze sits inside the furnace in a container called a crucible. The crucible is carefully lifted and tilted to pour the bronze right into the hollow cup. The bronze is now flowing through the sprues and into every groove and crevice. Bronze cools really fast. The artist hammers and blasts away the remainder of the ceramic shell, leaving only the bronze. Just as the wax copy was cleaned up, the artist now cleans up the bronze by hammering away the sprues and cutting off the cup. After polishing, we finally have a finished bronze piece. So just to recap, we went from clay to plaster, to wax, to silica, to bronze. It's a labor-intensive process, but it enables artists to create sculptures that are extremely durable and very long-lasting.